The first thing I remember is the buzzing of the fluorescent light above me, a sound that didn't quite match the rhythm of the heart monitor next to my bed. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp and metallic, reminding me that I was far from home. I blinked, vision blurry from the medication, and the ceiling seemed to sway in and out of focus. They told me it had only been a minor car accident, but my body felt heavy, like I had been pinned beneath something much larger than metal. Charleston nights are usually warm and filled with the sound of cicadas, but here inside the hospital, time seemed frozen. The hallway lights dimmed with the evening routine, footsteps of nurses fading as families trickled home. I was alone, except for the steady pulse of machines and the occasional rattle of a cart being wheeled past my door. My brother-in-law, Deliverance, had insisted on staying late. To everyone else, he looked like the picture of devotion. My sister Rowena had even bragged, "Not every man would sit up in a hospital ward all night for family." Mother praised him too, telling anyone who would listen that he was dependable, a man who knows how to handle things. Lying there, groggy but still aware, I tried to convince myself their words were true. Yet the way he moved in and out of the room, lingering too long, made my skin crawl. In the South, people often say family shows up when you're sick, and that's supposed to be comforting. But sometimes, the ones who show up are not the ones who should. Before the accident, Deliverance had sent me a text that at first felt harmless. I had been leaving work, exhausted and ready for the weekend, when my phone buzzed. His message read, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you." At the time, I assumed it meant he would help Rowena with dinner while I was in recovery, or maybe that he'd check in on Mother. That's how we talk about family here, taking care of each other. But as I lay in the hospital bed now, that line replayed in my mind with a different tone. The words, once a comfort, carried a weight I couldn't shake. People say hindsight is 20/20. Sometimes what sounds like kindness is really a warning dressed up pretty. I closed my eyes and remembered the buzz of that text alert, the vibration against my palm like a tiny alarm bell I ignored. I wished I had listened to it then. Doubt crept in with every passing hour. The medication blurred things, yes, but it couldn't explain the unease sitting heavy in my chest. Why would he text me so personally? Why not to my sister? The phrasing lingered, intimate in a way it shouldn't have been. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt, as though the message had never been about support, but something else entirely. Charleston is a city where appearances matter. People gossip in church pews about who stopped by the hospital, who brought flowers, who didn't bother showing up. Family is supposed to be measured by loyalty. Cordelia, my mother, loved to remind us of that. To her, Deliverance was exemplary. "He's the only man in this family who knows how to show up," she said proudly to a visiting aunt over the phone. Rowena clung to him as her pride and shield. At every family dinner, she praised him as a man who worked hard, who cared for his family. I used to smile politely, swallowing the doubt I didn't dare voice. Breaking family harmony was unthinkable, especially in a Southern household where women are taught to smooth edges, not sharpen them. But lying in that hospital bed, I recalled the words of Maya Angelou. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Deliverance had shown me pieces of himself before, the way his compliments sometimes slid too close, the way his eyes lingered a beat longer than necessary. I had chosen to ignore those signs. Harmony came at the cost of silence, and silence was what I had given. That night, drifting between waking and sleep, I noticed a shadow in the hallway. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw Deliverance standing outside my door. He wasn't sitting in the visitor's chair like before. He was shifting his weight, looking both ways down the hall. His stance wasn't protective. It was calculating. He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing in the dim corridor. I heard his voice, low and urgent. "She's too weak to notice anything," he said. My stomach tightened. A nurse walked by, and instantly his face rearranged itself into a mask of calm. He smiled politely, adjusted his shirt cuffs, and muttered something about coffee. The nurse nodded and kept walking. As soon as the hall was clear, the mask slipped, and I saw his jaw clench, his eyes dart nervously as if confirming no one else was watching. I felt a chill I couldn't explain. It wasn't the words that shook me most. It was how he said them. Like I wasn't a sister-in-law recovering from an accident, but a problem he was calculating how to manage. Back in my room, the silence felt heavier than the beeping machines. Was it the morphine twisting my perception, or was there truly something sinister in his behavior? Women are told so often that we exaggerate, that we misinterpret, that stress clouds judgment. In our 30s, many of us learn to dismiss the whispers inside us, chalking them up to nerves. But I could still hear my grandmother's voice, a woman who survived more storms than I could count. Baby, your gut is God's whisper. Don't ignore it. I looked at the ceiling tiles, each square blurring into the next, and made a promise to myself. If I left this hospital, if I regained full strength, I would no longer brush off those whispers. I would watch him more closely, listen more carefully, and refuse to smooth over the wrongness I felt. What had started as unease was solidifying into certainty. My family might not see it, might even resent me for questioning him, but I knew what I had witnessed. Suspicion was no longer a shadow. It was a seed taking root. The night deepened in Charleston. The hall grew quieter, machines hummed, and shadows stretched across the white hospital walls. I heard the soft click of the door, and the air seemed to shift. Deliverance stepped inside, his frame outlined against the dim light from the corridor. I wanted to close my eyes and pretend it was just the medicine clouding my thoughts, but I couldn't. I knew, even before he moved closer, that he was watching me. The soft click of the door closing behind him carried more weight than the steady hum of machines in my room. It was late, well past visiting hours, but the air still smelled of sanitizer and faint coffee drifting from the nurse's station. My heart monitor ticked along at its usual pace, but my pulse throbbed faster, betraying me. Deliverance walked in with the air of a guardian, moving like a man who had every right to be there. He pulled a chair up next to my bed and sat heavily, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. In the dim light, his shadow stretched long against the wall, bending unnaturally with every flicker of the overhead bulb. He bent close, whispering, "Don't worry, I've got you," almost in the same tone as the text he'd sent me before the accident. I stared at him, my body too weak to shift away. The words should have soothed, but they didn't. In the South, we're taught to trust the ones who sit by our bedsides, to believe family presence equals protection. But as the saying goes, not everyone who sits by your bed is there to heal you. I swallowed back the dryness in my throat, keeping my eyes open just enough to catch the small smirk tugging at his lips. He adjusted my blanket, pulling it up like a man caring for a child. To anyone else, it would have looked tender, Southern gallantry at its finest. If Rowena had walked in, she would have said, "See, he's the kind who never leaves your side." I could almost hear her voice, proud and smug. But lying there, I couldn't ignore the question, why was he still here? My mother had left hours earlier, muttering something about needing rest. Even Cordelia, who prided herself on being strong, hadn't insisted on staying through the night. Yet deliverance lingered. "Rest," he said softly, pressing the blanket down with more firmness than necessary. "You'll feel stronger tomorrow." I kept my eyes on him, searching for any trace of sincerity. Instead, what I saw was possession, not protection. It wasn't love of family that kept him there, it was control. Inside my head, I whispered to myself, "This isn't care, this is claiming territory." The medication blurred edges, but not enough to dim the sharpness of his gaze. He didn't look at me the way a concerned in-law should. His eyes traced my face, pausing too long, calculating. I remembered something Oprah once said in an interview I'd watched years back. "When a man shows you he sees you as prey, believe him the first time." That sentence landed in my chest like a stone. I wondered if it was just paranoia, if the morphine twisted my perceptions, but my gut told me otherwise. Women in this country know the feeling of being stared at too long, of doubting themselves when their instincts scream. I'd lived long enough to recognize the weight of being hunted, even if politely disguised. My grandmother's voice echoed faintly in memory. "Child, you know the difference between eyes that care and eyes that consume." And these weren't caring eyes. He leaned closer, the smell of his cologne overpowering the sterile air of the ward. You won't remember any of this, he murmured, fingers brushing mine as though checking my pulse. But the touch lingered, sliding into a gesture no brother-in-law should make. He straightened my gown with deliberate slowness, his knuckles grazing my collarbone. My breath caught, but my body lay motionless, trapped between weakness and fear. From the corner of the room, a faint red light blinked. The security camera, barely noticeable on most nights, pulsed like a heartbeat. He didn't notice it. He didn't even glance its way. But I did. His hand lingered too long on the blanket. "You'll be fine," he whispered again, his tone darker this time, more like a claim than comfort. Outside in the hall, a nurse walked past. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor. Deliverance stiffened, then quickly stood, adjusting my IV line like he'd been checking it all along. She didn't stop, didn't even look in. The moment passed, and he exhaled, slipping back into the chair as if nothing had happened. Inside me, shame flared, mixed with anger I couldn't voice. My body was silent, but my mind screamed. When he finally rose, slipping out into the hallway again, the room felt colder than before. He had left behind not just his shadow, but the heaviness of violation disguised as care. I lay awake, unable to close my eyes, cycling through the same questions over and over. Was it the morphine? Did I imagine the weight of his hand? The hushed words? The way he pulled my gown? No, I whispered to myself. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. My grandmother's warning returned, firmer now. The gut never lies, child. It's your first defense. I clung to those words. Still, doubt hovered. I wished I could rise, grab that camera, and play back the truth myself. What I didn't know then was that the silent eye in the corner was recording it all, holding proof I couldn't yet provide. The red light kept blinking, steady, patient, unnoticed by Deliverance when he returned once more, whispering something to himself before leaving again. If God gave me eyes too weak to fight, he gave me a camera that never blinked, I thought, my mind clinging to that one shred of hope. That was the night my family began to feel less like home and more like strangers. Morning came harshly, its light seeping through the thin blinds like needles stabbing at my eyelids. My body felt as if it had been weighted down by stones, but my mind, oh, my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. The night before clung to me, each memory stitched together in jagged patches, his whisper, his hands pressing the blanket, that look in the hallway. The hospital bustled as if nothing had happened. Nurses moved briskly, their voices a mix of clipped instructions and tired jokes. The smell of antiseptic washed over me, strangely comforting in its predictability. Yet none of it eased the heaviness pressing on my chest. It was as if smoke lingered after a fire no one else had noticed. I whispered into the empty room, almost daring myself to say it aloud. If last night was just a dream, why do I feel bruised inside? My throat tightened. The ache wasn't from the accident. It was from betrayal. Rowena appeared mid-morning, bright as always, her hair tied back neatly, a cardigan draped over her shoulders. She smiled, holding a paper cup of coffee in her hand, and set it down on the side table, as though her presence alone was proof that everything was fine. "How are you feeling?" she asked, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. I stared at her, searching for the courage I wasn't sure I had. "Rowena," I began, voice low. "Something happened last night. Deliverance. My words stumbled, but my resolve didn't. He wasn't here to watch over me. He was watching me." Her smile faltered, replaced quickly by a sigh of exasperation. "Alethea, you were drugged up. Morphine does things to your head. You know that." "No," I said firmly, gripping the blanket. "This wasn't the medicine. I know what I saw, what I felt." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You sound paranoid. He stayed all night because he cares, because he's the reason you're alive. Don't twist his kindness into something else." Anger flared in me, not because she doubted me, but because she wouldn't even entertain the possibility. Kindness doesn't whisper, "You won't remember this," while touching someone too long. "Stop," Rowena snapped, her cheeks flushing. You need rest. That's all. Don't make a mess out of the only person who's actually been here for you. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Gaslighting doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears your sister's face. She picked up her coffee, avoiding my eyes, and left soon after. The room was quiet again, but her words echoed like a gavel striking down judgment. Later in the afternoon, Cordelia walked in, her hand clutching Deliverance's arm as though he were her lifeline. He carried himself with the practiced ease of a man admired too often. "Look who's here," she announced, her voice warm. "The only man who truly cares in this family." I clenched my jaw, the words lodging sharp in my chest. "Mama," I said carefully, "there's something you need to know." But before I could continue, she cut me off. "Don't speak ill of him," she scolded, her tone sharp. "He's been nothing but dedicated. Sitting here, making sure you're safe. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" My voice cracked, louder than I intended. "I should be grateful that he—" "Enough!" Cordelia snapped, eyes blazing. "You've always been dramatic, Alethea. Always twisting things to make yourself the victim. Don't you dare smear the name of the man who's done more for this family than anyone else." Deliverance stood silently, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to defend himself. My mother was doing it for him. I felt the humiliation burn deep, especially when I noticed the patient in the bed across the curtain glance over. Curiosity piqued. My story was being rewritten before my eyes. My pain turned into his sacrifice. There's an old American saying, blood is thicker than water, but sometimes loyalty runs to the wrong river. Watching my mother beam at him while dismissing me, I knew I was drowning in that truth. When they finally left, the room was still but suffocating. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, forcing my breaths to steady. They weren't going to believe me, not Rowena, not Cordelia. I remembered a teacher once telling me, after I'd hesitated too long to stand up to a bully in school, "Doubt is a seed. If you don't uproot it, it grows into chains." I wasn't going to let their doubt bind me. My anger shifted, cooling into something sharper, more purposeful. If they wouldn't believe my words, maybe they would believe their own eyes. Maybe the camera that blinked silently in the corner would become my witness. I wasn't going to remain passive. Not anymore. That night, as the ward quieted and the hum of machines filled the silence, I kept my eyes fixed on the faint red light in the corner. It blinked steadily, faithfully, never wavering. "You saw it, didn't you?" I whispered into the dark. "You'll remember when they refuse to." And in that moment, I realized the tiny camera light had become my only ally. Afternoons in the hospital always carried a rhythm that could lull a person into thinking everything was ordinary. Carts squeaked as they rolled down the linoleum hallways, nurses chatted softly in pairs, and the smell of cafeteria food drifted faintly through the air vents. On the surface, it looked like calm. Inside me, though, there was a storm, a restlessness I couldn't shake after the night before. When Deliverance entered, he wore the look of a man who had sacrificed everything to sit by my bedside. His shoulders sagged with exaggerated fatigue, his eyes half-lidded as if he had carried the weight of the world just to protect me. Rowena followed him in, her smile wide and full of pride. "Look at him," she said to the nurse making notes on the chart. "He barely slept all night, didn't leave her side. That's devotion." The nurse glanced up, smiled warmly at him, and patted his arm. "Families like yours make all the difference." "She's lucky to have you." I clenched my jaw, my pulse quickening. "Lucky." I repeated the word silently as he rubbed at his eyes, playing the part of the sleepless hero. "I just couldn't close my eyes," Deliverance said, his voice thick with fake exhaustion. He reached for my hand, clasping it lightly. I kept thinking about her, making sure she was safe. The nurse's face softened, unaware of the irony. I held still, letting the moment pass, but my thoughts were blazing. He hadn't stayed to watch over me. He had stayed to watch me. Rowena, glowing, added, "Most men would have gone home hours ago. But not him. He's different." I swallowed down the anger clawing up my throat. Different, yes, but not in the way she imagined. Later that evening, when the nurse left and Rowena had stepped into the hallway to make a call, Deliverance leaned close again. I shifted uncomfortably, my body too weak to resist, my voice thin but steady. "You don't have to keep pretending," I murmured. He tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Pretending?" "I know what you did last night," I whispered, eyes locked on his. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head as though amused. "You're still on morphine, Alethea. Patients imagine things. Sometimes the mind plays tricks, especially with painkillers." When Rowena returned, he straightened, his voice firm. "She's been having odd thoughts," he said calmly, like he was delivering a medical report. "It's not uncommon. She needs rest." Rowena nodded quickly, falling right into his narrative. "Of course, I should have realized. That's why you sounded so panicked on the phone earlier." "No panic," he replied smoothly. "Just concern. But these things happen. Confusion is normal." My stomach turned. He was rewriting my truth into hallucination, twisting my words into delusion. It was a perfect trap. My reality turned into their pity. I gathered what little strength I had. "I'm not confused," I said firmly. "I know what I felt." Deliverance leaned down, lowering his voice. "And what did you feel exactly? A bad dream? A shadow in the room? You don't need to torture yourself." He pulled back, his face arranged into solemn compassion. Rowena squeezed my hand. "Don't stress yourself, Al. He's been nothing but devoted. You should try to rest." Gaslighting doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it stands in your room with a gentle smile and the full backing of your family. The tension built until I couldn't hold back anymore. "I know what I saw," I said louder, each word cutting through the quiet. "I know how it felt. You can call it drugs, confusion, dreams, but I know." Rowena's face flushed. "Stop this nonsense before you embarrass yourself in front of everyone. You're exhausted. We're all exhausted." Deliverance sighed, his expression serene, as though he were the one enduring hardship. "She just needs rest," he said again, turning to Rowena. "Don't push her." My hands trembled, not from weakness but from fury. I realized then I wasn't just fighting him. I was fighting a wall of complicity. Every time I spoke, they smoothed my words away like wrinkles on a freshly made sheet. But beneath their dismissal, my anger hardened into determination. If words couldn't save me, evidence would. I wasn't going to beg them to believe me anymore. I would show them the truth. When they finally prepared to leave, Deliverance lingered by the door. He glanced over his shoulder at me, lips curving into a smirk so subtle no one else would notice. But I did. It was a smile of victory, of someone certain he had silenced me. Rowena looped her arm through his, beaming. "Get some sleep," she said to me. "You'll feel better tomorrow." As the door closed behind them, I gripped the blanket tightly, whispering to myself, "If words won't save me, evidence will." That night, I decided silence would be my sharpest weapon. The southern dinner table was supposed to be a place of warmth. It was where casseroles appeared like clockwork, where glasses of sweet tea sweated in the evening humidity, where people bowed their heads for grace before lifting their forks. I had grown up believing that the table was sacred ground for family harmony, but that night, harmony was nowhere to be found. Cordelia's dining room gleamed with polished oak, the long table stretching under the glow of the chandelier. Casserole dishes steamed, cornbread sat neatly on a plate, and bowls of green beans lined the center. Yet the food, fragrant and hot, couldn't mask the stiffness in the air. Every word spoken carried tension. Every silence weighed heavier than lead. Rowena sat next to Deliverance, her hand wrapped around his like a wife displaying her prize. She leaned toward him, whispering something that made her smile. He chuckled softly, as though he were the picture of a perfect Southern gentleman. Cordelia, seated at the head, lifted her chin proudly, expecting civility, as though the mere act of eating together would stitch us back into a unit. There's an old saying down here, every family table is either a place for healing or a stage for war. I knew before the first serving spoon touched the casserole which it would be. I waited until halfway through the meal, until plates were full and glasses refilled, to raise my voice carefully. "Mama," I began, my tone measured. "There's something I can't stay quiet about any longer." Cordelia's fork clinked against her plate. Not at this table, Alethea, she warned, but I pressed forward. It's about Deliverance. I don't feel safe around him. The silence that followed was sharper than any knife. Rowena dropped her fork, glaring. You're ungrateful. He's been nothing but good to us. He's done more for this family than anyone else. I clenched my hands under the table. Good men don't smirk in hospital hallways at midnight, I said evenly. Deliverance leaned back, cool as ever. She was under sedation. She doesn't know what she's saying. Cordelia raised her hand. Enough! You will not disrupt this table with nonsense. But the words tumbled out of me like floodwater. I'm not confused. He wasn't watching over me. He was watching me. Rowena's face reddened. Stop this before you embarrass yourself. He's the reason you're still alive. Don't twist his care into something ugly. Deliverance's lips curved into the faintest smile. I forgive her, he said to the table, voice dripping with false grace. It's the medicine. She's not herself. I looked around at their faces, seeing judgment in their eyes. It felt less like a family dinner and more like a courtroom where I sat as the accused. There's a truth we don't like to admit. When the family closes ranks, truth gets buried under the tablecloth. And I was watching my truth vanish beneath theirs. The argument escalated, voices rising. Cordelia shook her head, muttering about ungrateful children. Rowena clung tighter to her husband, defending him with each breath. Deliverance basked in the performance, letting the women fight while he played saint, but arrogance has a way of slipping. In the heat of his own defense, he let the mask crack. This family, he said firmly, needs someone responsible handling the estate, not someone weak and unstable. The words fell heavy, silencing the room. My fork hovered midair. My chest tightened. His concern wasn't just about painting me as unstable. It was about control. Cordelia looked uncomfortable, but brushed past it. He only means he wants to protect what's ours, she said quickly. Rowena chimed in, eager to cover his misstep. Yes, exactly. He worries about Mama, about all of us. Don't twist it. But I had heard the slip for what it was. The assault wasn't just about power over me. It was tied to money, to legacy, to the inheritance everyone whispered about, but no one named aloud. It was the first crack in his armor, and still, nobody wanted to see it. In America, nothing exposes the ugliness of family quite like inheritance. I knew it then. The fight wasn't just about truth. It was about survival in a family where loyalty had a price tag. Shame burned my cheeks, but something stronger rose beneath it. Defiance. You think I'll stay quiet? I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. Strength isn't found in silence. It's found in facing what you don't want to hear. Deliverance smirked, leaning closer as if confiding in me while the others listened. You're confused, Alethea, and I forgive you. His words were coated in charm, a dagger wrapped in silk. Cordelia frowned. That's enough, both of you. This is not the time or place. But I wouldn't shrink. I lifted my chin. You want me to be weak, to disappear into silence. But if I'm the problem, then I'll become your problem. The room grew cold. Rowena gaped at me, shaking her head. You don't know what you're saying. Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying, I replied. My eyes locked on Deliverance. He held my gaze, calm and smug, certain of his victory. But inside me, a plan had begun to form. If they wouldn't listen to my words, I would make them see the truth for themselves. That night at Cordelia's table, surrounded by denial, I realized my family would never hand me justice. I would have to gather it myself. As dinner ended, plates half-eaten, silence thick, Deliverance leaned close to me as the others rose to clear the table. His breath brushed my ear. No one will ever believe you, he whispered, his tone smooth, triumphant. I gripped my fork until my knuckles ached. Not yet, I told myself. But they'll see soon enough. The dinner table confrontation still clung to me like smoke. I sat in my hospital bed the next morning, the walls pressing in, replaying every dismissive word, every glance that sided with him. Rowena had called me ungrateful. Mother had shielded him like a prized son. Deliverance had leaned in, whispering words meant to bury me alive in doubt. No one will ever believe you. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on: the camera. That blinking red light, steady as a metronome, had witnessed what my family refused to see. I couldn't trust their ears, but maybe I could trust the eyes of a machine. They tell us to trust family in this country, but sometimes the safest person is the stranger paid to watch over you. My gaze followed the nurses and staff as they moved about. They had no stake in our legacy, our inheritance, our lies. They were here to keep order. If anyone noticed his late-night visits, it might be them. I resolved to watch, to listen, and to find someone who had seen what I had lived. Despair had carried me through the night, but by morning, it shifted into determination. The shadows didn't just hide secrets, they carried clues if I was willing to look. Sophrona, a night shift nurse, moved carefully, her eyes focused on the computer monitor in the corner of the staff station. I noticed her expression tighten, lips pressing into a thin line. Later, when she came to check my vitals, I asked, "Rough night?" She hesitated before answering. "Just equipment issues. Had to review some footage because of a technical alarm." Something in her tone made me press, "Footage?" Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. "Routine checks." She busied herself with my IV, but her hands trembled slightly. Hours later, I overheard her speaking in hushed tones with another nurse. "If I file this, he'll sue. Families like theirs always sue." My pulse quickened. She had seen something. Something she wasn't sure she could bear to name. When she returned that evening, I caught her hand gently before she left the room. "You saw him, didn't you?" My voice was quiet, but sure. Her lips parted, then closed. She shook her head, but the tremor gave her away. "You need to rest," she whispered. But I saw the truth in her eyes. Hope sparked in me, fragile, but alive. That night, as the ward hushed, my mind replayed the detail of the blanket being pulled over me awkwardly, as if someone had been trying to hide rather than comfort. I mentioned it casually the next morning when Sophrona came in. The blanket, it wasn't how the nurses usually leave it. It was twisted, heavy across me. She froze, eyes darting to the floor. Finally, she nodded. "On the footage," she whispered. "He adjusted it. Not like care, more like concealment." The words struck like ice. My suspicion, long buried under accusations of morphine-induced confusion, aligned perfectly with the evidence. A blanket, meant to symbolize warmth and protection, had become a veil for abuse. My fury rose, but so did validation. "Not everything covered is protected," I muttered. Her head jerked up. "What did you say?" "My grandmother used to say that," I told her. And she was right. He thought he could cover his actions, but he left proof. I leaned closer, gripping her wrist lightly. "If I can't speak without being silenced, then let the camera speak for me." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She didn't answer, but I could see her fear battling with something else, something like resolve. The next evening, Sophrona lingered longer than usual. Her face was pale, but her voice carried weight. "There's more," she said softly. "What do you mean?" Another pause, another glance over her shoulder. "One of the staff. He saw Deliverance too, but he's not talking. Deliverance made sure of it." My stomach dropped. "Made sure?" "He made a donation. Quiet. Enough to buy silence." The air in the room thickened. Money was the weapon now, silencing witnesses before they spoke. In this country, I'd seen it too many times. Justice muffled by checks written in the dark. I forced my voice steady. "He didn't just try to steal my body. He tried to buy silence too." Her eyes glistened. "I shouldn't even be telling you this. If he finds out, then he'll know I'm not afraid," I cut in. For the first time, Sophrona looked directly at me, the flicker of admiration softening her fear. "I'll help you," she whispered. "Quietly. I'll keep copies of the footage." Relief mingled with dread. If Deliverance suspected I was gathering evidence, he might escalate. But it was a risk I had to take. This was no longer passive endurance. It was active resistance. That night, I stared down at the blanket stretched across my legs. To anyone else, it was hospital linen, meant for warmth. To me, it was a reminder of his crime, of the way he had tried to cloak his trespass beneath its folds. He thought he covered me, I whispered into the silence. But he only covered his own grave. The red light blinked in the corner, steady and patient. My ally in the shadows. After visiting hours, the hospital always took on a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful, but uneasy, like the walls themselves held secrets. The hallway lights dimmed, the hum of machines became sharper, and every echo carried twice the weight. I knew deliverance wasn't finished. His arrogance showed in every look he gave me, even when no one else noticed. Sophrona slipped into my room during rounds, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more on the footage," she said, her eyes darting toward the door. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Her fingers fidgeted with the cuff of her sleeve. "It's not just him going into your room. There's audio, too. Things you need to hear. But, if this gets out, it could be dangerous. For me. For you." The air grew heavy. Proof existed, but so did danger. There's a saying I once heard. The truth will set you free, but first, it will scare you to death. That felt truer than ever. The next evening, Sophrona found me again, this time in the break room when it was nearly empty. She carried a small tablet, glancing over her shoulder before setting it down on the table. "Watch," she whispered. The footage showed Deliverance pacing the hallway outside my room. His phone glowed in his hand. His voice, caught by the microphone, was low but clear. "Once she's out of the way, the estate falls into my hands." I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just me he wanted to erase. It was everything tied to my name. My voice cracked as I looked at Sophrona. "It was never about me, was it? It was about the money." Her expression was grim. "It usually is." I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying my breath. In that moment, I understood I was not only a victim of assault, but a pawn in a game much older, one carved by inheritance and greed. In America, money often splits families deeper than any knife. Mine was no different. Later that week, I confronted Imogen, one of the doctors I trusted. Her eyes flickered nervously when I asked if she'd seen Deliverance leave my room that night. Finally, she exhaled, lowering her voice. "I saw him, but he made a donation for new equipment. He said it would help the ward." The words hit like a blow. "You mean he paid you to stay quiet?" Imogen's face crumpled. "I didn't want trouble. You have to understand, I've worked too hard to lose everything over one family's drama." "Drama?" My voice rose, sharp. "You call this drama? He walked into my room at night, and you let a check buy your silence." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I thought it would be easier not to get involved." I leaned closer, my anger measured but steady. "By avoiding trouble, you gave him permission. You let him believe he could get away with it." She flinched, but she didn't argue. I walked away knowing the truth. Proof existed, but trust was fragile. People had a price, and he had learned to pay it. In Charleston, money didn't just build houses. It built silence. That night, Sophrona brought me more. This time it wasn't video, it was audio. She placed a small recorder on my lap, her hands trembling. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said. "But you need to know exactly what he said." I pressed play. His whisper filled the room, dark and deliberate. "You won't remember, and no one will believe you." My chest tightened as though the walls themselves had closed in. The cruelty was no longer speculation. It was fact, recorded in his own voice. Sophrona's eyes brimmed with pity. "I don't know how you've endured this." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew the world would protect him. That's the cruelest part. I thought of all the women who had been told they imagined it, that their pain was delusion, that their instincts were lies. In this country, survivors often speak of the doubt cutting deeper than the crime itself. I was living proof of that, but something inside me shifted. Despair had carried me long enough. What replaced it was sharper determination. If he thought silence would shield him, he was wrong. I stared at the hospital monitor later that night, the screen reflecting my face as his whisper replayed in my head. He was right about one thing, I whispered to myself. They wouldn't believe me, but they would believe the tape. That was the night I began weaving the trap, threading silence into my sharpest weapon. Cordelia's house glowed that evening like it had on every holiday for decades. Porch lights bright, curtains drawn back, the scent of roast and cornbread seeping into the neighborhood. To the neighbors, it must have looked like a gathering of joy, a reconciliation of sorts. But as I stepped through the door, I knew the air inside was different. Relatives filled the large living room, voices hushed at first, then rising in polite chatter. Cordelia walked proudly between them, ushering people to seats, refilling drinks, and praising Deliverance for his sacrifice. My sister Rowena clung to him, her face glowing with pride, presenting him as if he were a prize she had won. He moved with ease, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, pouring iced tea into glasses as if he owned the room. His charm drew people in, just as it always had. But I saw through it. Charm is the mask that liars wear best. I sat quietly at first, watching, holding my breath against the weight of what I knew. They expected me to keep silent, to let the performance play out, but silence had carried me far enough. Tonight, I carried the truth, and I knew at some point it would break the surface. Deliverance raised his glass, gesturing with his wedding ring catching the light. "Family is everything," he said, his voice smooth. "I've done my best to live up to that." He squeezed Rowena's hand for emphasis, and the crowd nodded approvingly. My eyes fixed on that ring. I remembered that same hand tugging at my blanket in the hospital, the same knuckles brushing my skin in a way no brother-in-law ever should. I stood slowly, my voice clear. "A ring doesn't make you faithful," I said. "Your actions do." The room stiffened. Forks clinked against plates. Cordelia's head whipped toward me, her face tightening. Rowena gasped, "Alethea, don't start this again." But I didn't stop. I gestured toward his ring. "That little band doesn't erase the truth of what he's done. You all may see loyalty, but I see a mask." Deliverance smiled faintly, tilting his head as though indulging a child's tantrum. "She's still recovering. Sometimes medicine clouds judgment." "No," I shot back. "Medicine didn't cloud what I saw, or what I felt." The room vibrated with murmurs. His ring, gleaming under the chandelier, became more than jewelry. It was a badge of respectability hiding betrayal. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment. Cordelia hurried to answer it. In stepped Imogen, the doctor who had avoided me in whispers, now holding her chin high. "I need to say something," she announced. Her voice shook, but she pressed forward. "This isn't the first time he's done this. In college, there were women, complaints that went nowhere because he paid them off." The room erupted. Chairs scraped, some gasped, others demanded answers. Deliverance's face darkened. "Lies!" he shouted. "She's bitter, trying to smear me because she envies what we've built." Imogen didn't flinch. "I stayed quiet too long, but I won't anymore." I rose beside her, seizing the moment. "You told me no one would believe me," I said, my eyes on him. "But you forgot. Others remember too." The relatives shifted uneasily. Trust cracked, the facade beginning to crumble. Rowena looked at him, her smile faltering. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. Cornered, Deliverance changed tactics. He clutched Rowena's hand and suddenly his voice broke. Tears welled, sliding down his cheeks as he choked out words between sobs. "I've been under pressure, trying to keep this family safe, trying to live up to all of you. Maybe I haven't been perfect, but I've done everything for this family." Rowena's face contorted, torn between loyalty and a creeping sense of betrayal. She pressed his hand to her chest, her own tears falling. Cordelia stepped forward, voice firm. "He's a good man under stress. We all make mistakes, but his heart is in the right place." I felt anger surge, but I steadied it with clarity. "Real tears don't hide crimes," I said. My voice cut through the sobbing. He turned his wet eyes toward me, but I held his gaze. If crying cleaned sins, prisons would be empty. The relatives murmured again, some nodding, some still shaking their heads. The performance had worked for years, but the cracks were widening. His tears, once disarming, now looked like water slipping through clenched fists. I sat back, watching his mask slip further, a strange mix of fury and satisfaction coiling inside me. He was losing ground, and we both knew it. As the evening wound down, Deliverance's tears dried. His face hardened, and when the others looked away, he leaned toward me, venom dripping from every word. "You think you've won? This family will still choose me over you." I met his glare steadily. "Then let's see what the truth chooses." And in that instant, I knew the breaking point had come. After the storm of accusations and tears in the last gathering, the house had settled into a brittle calm. People lingered in Cordelia's living room, voices lowered, eyes darting between me and Deliverance. He sat with Rowena at his side, her hand clutched tightly in his while he soaked in the pity washing over him. His act of brokenness had convinced some, their murmurs leaning in his favor. I sat quietly in the corner, hands folded in my lap, letting him bask. Silence is often mistaken for surrender, but I had learned it could be strategy. The longer he believed I was beaten, the bolder he became. He was careless now, careless enough to smirk at me when no one else was watching. His arrogance was a rope tightening around his own neck. Around me, relatives whispered, "Poor man, look how much he's endured." Rowena's lucky to have someone so loyal. Half convinced, half fooled, I kept my gaze steady, my lips pressed shut. He thought silence was weakness. But silence, held long enough, was the sharpest blade of all. I had already put my plan in motion, so Frona had given me what I needed, the copied footage, audio, and all. I had kept quiet for days, letting Deliverance think he had won, while every second built toward this moment. Now, the family was fully gathered, glasses clinking, wine poured, laughter returning in cautious bursts. The tension of last night seemed to ease as the crowd sank back into denial. Deliverance leaned back in his chair, relaxed, his mask fully restored. Inside me, a fire burned steady. Let them laugh, I thought. The storm hasn't broken yet. My silence wasn't fear. It was a countdown. The countdown ended when the door opened. Sophrona entered, her face pale but resolute, carrying a laptop under her arm. Conversations faltered. The laughter died quickly as she set it on the coffee table and connected it to the projector. Deliverance's face stiffened. "What is this?" he demanded. Sophrona's voice trembled, but she pressed forward. "Something they all need to see." The screen flickered to life. Gasps spread through the room as grainy footage filled the wall. Deliverance stepping into my hospital room past midnight. His figure loomed, his hands adjusting my blanket with deliberate slowness, leaning too close. The audio followed, his whisper seeping into every corner of the room. "You won't remember, and no one will believe you." The silence was explosive. Hands covered mouths. A cousin whispered, "Dear God!" Rowena stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "This can't be real. It can't." Cordelia's hand trembled against her chest. "Oh, Lord!" Deliverance shot to his feet, face red, voice booming. "This is manipulated. It's fake. She's twisting everything." But the timestamp glowed in the corner. The angle was fixed. His voice, undeniable, reverberated in the stunned silence. The room erupted into chaos. "You lied to us!" someone shouted. "Rowena, you can't defend this," another relative snapped. Deliverance's eyes darted wildly, sweat forming on his brow. For years he had been untouchable, his mask flawless. Now it had been ripped away in front of everyone who once believed in him. And I sat still, steady. For the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. He was. The fallout spread quickly. Some family members tried weakly to defend him, muttering about stress or misunderstanding, but their voices lacked conviction. Others recoiled entirely, disgust etched across their faces. Rowena wept openly, torn between the loyalty she had clung to and the truth now glaring back at her. Tell me it's not true, she whispered to him, voice broken. Deliverance turned on me instead, his mask gone. You think you've won something? He roared. You've destroyed this family. You've poisoned everyone against me. I didn't flinch. He jabbed a finger at me, spittle flying. You're nothing. Without me, you're nothing. The irony hit me hard. He had whispered his cruelty in the dark for weeks. Now he screamed it in the open, no longer shielded by shadows. His rage confirmed everything the footage had shown. I lifted my chin, my voice calm. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and you've been rotting in the dark too long. The words cut deeper than his shouts. Around me, relatives shifted, seeing clearly for the first time. Then came the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Sophrona met my eyes across the room, her small nod telling me everything. I wasn't alone anymore. She had already contacted the authorities. Deliverance's face drained of color. He glared at me, sweat rolling down his temple, voice cracking with desperation. This isn't over. I leaned forward, my tone sharp, unshaken. No, it's just beginning. The sirens grew louder, sealing his fate. The wail of sirens had barely faded when the front door burst open. Officers in dark uniforms streamed into Cordelia's living room, the flash of red and blue from their cars still bouncing through the curtains. Deliverance sprang from his chair, panic twisting his features, his voice cracking between shouting and pleading. You can't just barge in here. This is my home, my family, he barked, then turned frantically toward Cordelia. Tell them, Mama. Tell them they're making a mistake. Cordelia clutched at her pearls, her lips trembling, but no words came. Rowena, pale and shaking, gripped the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Mr. Caldwell, an officer said firmly, you're under arrest. Please, step forward. I stood still, my hands folded in front of me, watching the chaos unravel. The night that once belonged to his lies now belonged to the law. His control, carefully built through years of charm and manipulation, slipped like sand through his fingers. The officer read him his rights in a clear, steady voice. Deliverance's mask shattered with every word. He twisted toward me, his face red with rage. This is your doing, he spat. You think you've won something? You've turned this family against me. I didn't answer. He swung next to Cordelia, his tone suddenly softer. Mama, you know me. You know I'd never hurt her. You've seen how I've carried this family. Cordelia's voice faltered. He's always been dedicated, always showed up. But her eyes darted toward the floor when neighbors peered in through the open doorway, their whispers spreading like wildfire. Rowena finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I saw the footage, Deliverance. I can't explain it away anymore. I tried, but I can't. The room was silent except for the heavy breathing of a man exposed. Reputation in Charleston is currency. And that night, Deliverance went bankrupt in front of the very people whose approval he worshipped. I felt a strange calm wash over me. For so long, I had been the powerless one, the silenced one. But now, I wasn't prey. I was a witness to justice. At the station, under fluorescent lights that hummed overhead, Sophrona handed a sealed evidence bag to the detective. Inside was a plastic water bottle. This was left in the hospital corridor the night of the incident, she explained. His fingerprints are all over it. Deliverance sat hunched in the corner, his lawyer beside him, his face drained of its confident color. Forensic analysis, the detective said, flipping through paperwork, matches his prints to the exact time of entry into her room. His lawyer shot to his feet. This proves nothing. He could have touched that bottle any time. My client was concerned for his sister-in-law. The detective cut him off, his tone sharp. The timestamp matches the camera footage. The bottle was discarded at 2:43 in the morning, right after he was caught on video entering the patient's room. The words landed with finality. Deliverance sagged back into his chair, muttering under his breath. I sat quietly, watching. Facts are stubborn things, John Adams once said. Tonight, those facts stood taller than any lies. Truth doesn't just whisper, sometimes it shouts through evidence. News of his arrest spread faster than the storm winds that sometimes swept through Charleston's coast. By morning, local papers splashed his face across their front pages, TV stations replayed the footage, anchors speaking gravely about betrayal within a family. Social media buzzed with commentary, the trusted brother-in-law who wasn't what he seemed. Old acquaintances came forward, recalling his arrogance, his long history of bending truth to his advantage. Whispers of past misconduct resurfaced, stories that had been buried beneath charm and influence. Rowena filed for separation quietly but decisively, the weight of public humiliation too much to bear. She didn't call me, didn't face me, but I knew it was done. Cordelia retreated into silence, embarrassed by her blind loyalty. She stopped answering phone calls, closed the curtains of her home, and avoided church pews where whispers now turned to judgment. Standing outside the courthouse after one of the hearings, I whispered to myself, "Justice doesn't erase pain, but it does stop the bleeding." In America, public exposure often cuts deeper than any prison sentence. Deliverance's punishment had begun long before a gavel would fall. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Justice was heavy, not light, but it was real. As cameras flashed and journalists shouted my name, I didn't smile. I stood tall but quiet, holding my own ground in the chaos. "This was never about winning," I whispered. "It was about surviving." And in the silence after the storm, I began to reckon with what survival truly meant. The morning after the arrest was so still it almost felt staged. The courthouse steps were quiet now, though just hours earlier they had been packed with reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing in my face. Today, the only sound was the rustle of newspapers being delivered, their headlines screaming about Deliverance's downfall. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw me. Some whispered, others kept their eyes down, as if proximity to me might drag them into scandal. I sat with a cup of coffee cooling in my hands and thought, the silence is different now. It isn't mine anymore. It's his. Relief and exhaustion weighed equally on my shoulders. Survival had come at a cost I hadn't yet measured. I remembered something I once read. Sometimes winning feels more like limping across a finish line than raising a trophy. That was exactly what this morning felt like. Not triumph, but endurance. By midday, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Rowena stood there, eyes swollen, her hand bare where her wedding ring had always been. For a moment we only stared, the air thick with things unsaid. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside and she sat at the edge of my sofa, twisting her fingers together. "I didn't want to believe you," she began, her voice cracking. "Because believing you meant admitting I was married to a monster." I kept my tone steady. "Believing me would have meant protecting me. And you didn't." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I thought I was protecting us, our family, our name, but all I did was help him hurt you." Her words were heavy, and though part of me wanted to lash out, I knew it wouldn't change what had already been done. "You chose him over me," I said plainly. "That choice has consequences." She dropped her gaze, whispering, "I know, and I will carry that." The conversation hung in the air, a mixture of confession and indictment. In American families, denial often runs so deep that by the time truth surfaces, it's already too late. The silence between us broke when she leaned forward suddenly and wrapped her arms around me. For a heartbeat, I froze. Rowena, who had defended him against me at every turn, now clung to me like she might drown without it. Her tears soaked into my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for. It was acknowledgement that she finally saw the truth. I closed my eyes, letting her words settle. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's the most you can get. I remembered a saying, families break, but sometimes they bend back just enough not to snap forever. Her embrace felt like that. A fragile bending, a hesitant attempt at repair. Still, scars remain, even when the bleeding stops. When she pulled away, her face was streaked with tears, but there was a clarity in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "You can't," I replied. "But you can stop pretending nothing broke." She nodded slowly, stood, and walked to the door. For once, she didn't defend him. She didn't excuse herself. She just left, carrying the weight of her choices on her shoulders. After she was gone, I sat in the quiet of my own home and thought about the journey I'd taken. I had been waiting for their validation, waiting for someone to stand by me, but my strength hadn't come from them. It had come from surviving, from standing even when they all turned away. "The strongest oak of the forest is not the one protected from the storm," I whispered to myself, "but the one that stands in the open." I decided I would no longer measure my worth by their acceptance. I would build a life on my own terms, my career, my peace, my home. It was liberating, but also sobering. Survival came with clarity, and clarity often came with loneliness. Still, I chose dignity over dependency. That choice was mine. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Charleston rooftops, I closed my front door and locked it with steady hands. The sound of the bolt sliding into place felt final, grounding. "This home will never be invaded again," I whispered into the stillness. "Not by him, not by silence." And with that vow, I began to shape a life that was finally mine. The trial day arrived with a heaviness that seemed to sink into Charleston's cobblestone streets. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras raised, voices barking questions as though this were a spectacle for their consumption. To me, it wasn't theater. It was reckoning. Inside, the air was thick with tension. I walked past benches filled with strangers, supporters, skeptics, and the curious. Deliverance was led and shackled, his once proud stride reduced to a shuffle. His skin was pale, his eyes darting, stripped of the hero image he had carried for so long. The prosecutor laid everything bare, the footage, the audio, the testimony, and finally, the water bottle with his fingerprints. Each piece was another stone placed upon him until his lies collapsed under the weight. I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, listening as his own words condemned him. The whisper he had thought would vanish into shadows now echoed in a courtroom for all to hear. "You won't remember. No one will believe you." The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. That day, I felt them grind. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, their verdict was swift. Guilty, on attempted assault, fraud, obstruction. Deliverance lashed out, lunging forward as guards restrained him. "This is your fault," he shouted at me, his face twisted with venom. I didn't flinch. I looked back at him, steady. "No," I thought. "This was always your hand writing your downfall." Rowena sobbed quietly in the corner, her face buried in her hands, but she didn't defend him, not once. By the end of that day, she had filed for divorce, her denial shattered beyond repair. Cordelia sat frozen, her lips pressed tight. For years she had praised him as the dependable man, the savior of our family. Now she stared at him, silent, as though realizing all at once the price of her blindness. For me, the impact wasn't joy, it was clarity. The man who had weaponized silence was finally being silenced by truth. And for the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. He was. After sentencing, as they prepared to take him away, I rose from my seat and approached. Deliverance's wrists were bound, his face twisted with rage. "You told me no one would believe me," I said, my voice clear enough for the whole room. "But now everyone does." His eyes flared, but no words came. For the first time, his mouth stayed shut. That was the ultimate reversal. His taunts had crumbled into ash. In America, the truth doesn't whisper forever. It waits for the right microphone. As the guards led him away, I felt a cathartic release. Not triumph, not vengeance, but the steady satisfaction of reclaiming what was mine, my dignity. I wasn't his victim. I was the survivor who chose justice. Weeks later, I stood on the porch of a small house I had purchased with my own savings. No grand family estate. No legacy chained to betrayal. Just a quiet street, a yard I could call mine, and air that tasted like freedom. I planted a garden in the back, pressing seeds into the soil with my bare hands. Each one felt like a declaration of growth, of regrowth, of life that would not be defined by his shadow. I no longer needed Rowena's approval. I no longer craved Cordelia's belief. Their silence had nearly destroyed me, but I had learned something vital. I could stand without them. My truth was my validation. I took a new job, one that gave me purpose outside the walls of family obligation. When people whispered, I let them. Whispers had once been my cage. Now they were just noise in the distance. The best revenge, they say, is living well. And I intended to do exactly that. Scars remained. They always would. But they were proof of survival, not of weakness. One evening, as the sky turned orange over Charleston, I closed my journal and set it on the windowsill. I looked out at the horizon, breathing deeply. I thought justice would taste sweet, I whispered. Instead, it tastes steady, like water after a fire. I don't crave their belief anymore. I have mine. I turned, closed my door, and locked it with deliberate hands. The story they wrote for me was over. The story I would write for myself had just begun.